you want the best bang for your buck. So you got to look at how much things cost and what fits into your budget. And also you got to look for different, like a diversity of biologicals. There's a lot of biologicals out there that are single species or two or three species. And if that's what you're trying to achieve, that's great. But there's also other biologicals that are the broad spectrum of biologicals, and so that gives you, access to a lot more components in your soil.
Move on over compost, because biologicals are also showing to be a fantastic source to help build soil health. Through all of our interviews with scientists and researchers and farmers and gardeners, we are learning that compost is king when it comes to building the soil food web and building the health of the soil. And we are also learning that biologicals can be just as effective in different ways. So what is a biological? How do they work? And when do we use them? In this interview with Robert Galarneau from Top Horizon, who is a farmer himself, he talks about his use of biologicals, why he uses them, and why he chooses them over compost, and what to look for when choosing a biological. He farms both commercially and organically, and brings a wealth of knowledge as a farmer and as a practitioner of using biologicals when maybe you can't get compost in your area, or you don't know how to make compost yet. We're deeply honored you're tuning into this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't joined us on our newsletter yet, you can do that for free, where we share tips and tricks and resources to build soil health and to build your own personal health and well-being too. It's our goal to make your farming, gardening, and health goals a reality with heart and soil. Enjoy this conversation with Robert Galarneau of Clearview Farms and Top Horizon Egg Inputs. Thank you for joining me today to share your story and experience and expertise as a farmer and as somebody who's deeply educated in agriculture, and also somebody who's been running a farm business for literally decades. I think you bring such a deep wealth of knowledge to new farmers and old farmers, young farmers, so much, and the important roles that biologicals can play in taking our farming to the next level and making us successful and thrive as farmers. So welcome, Robert. Thanks for joining me today.
No, you're welcome, Natalie. Thanks for taking the time and doing an interview with me. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's my honor. So, Robert, you have quite a deep background in terms of farming, and you're also educated. Not that being educated as farm is important, but sometimes people really deeply value an educational background when it comes to farming. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about your history in your education in farming, how long you've been doing it, and what kind of farming you do.
Okay. In my early years, I went to US vocation agriculture, came back to the farm, started a grain business with my brother and father. And since then, more or less got back into the farming aspect of it. I deeply enjoy farming, and just recently discovered more about soil health and really dialing into microbes and the systems that are within the soil. To me, it's really exciting and my new hobby, I guess. And the more I look into it, the more you learn, and there's more. For me, it's just keeps on getting more exciting. So
that's so cool. What do you love about farming?
Well, it's in my roots, really. Farming started, we're on the farm there. It's like a three-generation farm. And I just like being on the land. I like watching the crops grow. I'm really interested in soil and how the soil interacts with plants and microbes. And it's like trying to better yourself every year and trying to increase the soil productivity. And so it's kind of like a challenge each year for me.
Mm-hmm. And Robert, you farm organically and also do some farming non-organically. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. Yep.
Okay. So I think this is a really valuable conversation because you wear two hats in your farming and you get to see the results of what you do in two different methods of farming. Would you agree?
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And what do you feel like is one of the biggest and most common struggles for a farmer, whether they're organic or biodynamic or conventional or somewhere in between?
Well, I think it all comes down to you want to have the best crops you can, and it doesn't matter which, if it's conventional or organic. And so you're always trying to look at how to increase your productivity. And it all comes down to a common factor, which is within your soil. And so there's different factors that you have to really look at. On the organic side, you have limited resources to use to increase productivity. On the conventional side, you have more options. And so yeah, I mean it's a little bit of a juggling act.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And did you come from an organic background or what people call conventional farming background, or did you have both in your roots?
Yeah, no, I came from an organic background. My father farmed organic in the 80s. He was one of the first people to bring in OCIA, which is a third party independent certification company in Saskatchewan. So I grew up with organic farming quite extensively and grew up with the practices back then. And I kind of watched as how well, you learn a little bit more about soil, so your practices change. And now with more education in soil health, the practices are really changing from when I started.
Mm-hmm. And when did you realize, because it sounds like you ran into some struggles in yields and crop production. And I'm wondering, when did you start to notice that and notice that you had to do something differently?
Yeah, so like it all goes back to a quote from Jay Fuhr. He said, "My grandfather grew great crops. My father grew good crops, and I'm struggling to grow good crops." And I can see that progression almost as time goes by, and that's a kind of a wake up call because you want to have great productivity on your farm and you want to be profitable. And if it keeps going that way, you can tell that something's not right and you're going in the wrong direction. So something has to change. And so that was the start of my journey on soil health, like really dialing in on soil.
Hmm. How did you know it was soil though? How did you to turn towards the soil? And how did you look at it differently? Because it sounds like up until then it was like a summer follow and crop rotations, and you're doing just the things that a lot of grain farmers would do traditionally in an organic setting. And you're still struggling with the production of your crops. So I'm just wondering, how did you to turn towards the soil?
Well, as a farmer, we kind of know that we got to be good stewards of your land and in the land's soil. And a lot of the companies growing up, they always talk about it, macronutrients as you got to concentrate on. And for years, we thought about that as that was the main components that we have to look at. But recently, there's more and more articles about micronutrients and soil organisms that help your plants grow in the soil. So, in doing some reading and talking to a lot of professionals, like the soil scientists and stuff, they started to open up my eyes to the ecology in soil, plant ecology, and how microbes interact with the plants and how beneficial they can be and how just the whole ecosystem within the soil. So it was kind of an eye opener. We always knew that soil was, the main component, but at what depth did we? It's many layers and it's really complicated, and and that's what I find interesting about it.
Mm-hmm. And before we jump into what you found to be really helpful in building your soil, one of the things that we talked about a couple of weeks ago was the regen egg hurdle. And I just love that term. I never heard it really before speaking with you. And because there's this big uptick in soil health, and there's this big uptick in being a regenerative farmer, and even beyond being an organic farmer or biological farmer or ecological farmer, being a regenerative farmer is all the rage. And so, what do you mean when you talk about the regen egg hurdle, and what is that?
Yeah, that hurdle is it's because in the farming, like if you listen to all the ads, they're all specific on egg inputs. This is more on the conventional side, and they got the farmer believing that you need these inputs to grow a good crop, and if you don't use them, you're gonna fail at growing a good crop. And so we get into a rut of how we farm and how we do things, and that's been going on for years. And for people to get into the regen mindset, which is using the natural cycles of the soil, like nitrogen cycling, it's a real eye opener because a lot of farmers, we haven't heard of these kind of know, and it kind of makes sense, but you don't realize that it's happening in your soil, and you can actually harness that to help you get better crops. So to jump out of that main farming practice that you're used to and try something different, it's not a leap of faith, but it's kind of, you got to get outside your comfort zone. And I mean, in doing so, you're used to doing one thing as is, and you've been successful doing it. But trying to get out of that comfort zone is a real tough step sometimes. Not only just on your own farm, but even when you go to Coffee Row or you go to talk to friends or fellow farmers, you can experience a lot of negativity or skepticism when you're explaining what you're trying to do, and it puts you in a really uncomfortable position, and you have to be able to shoulder that kind of negativity, and it can be tough, and not everybody wants to do that.
So you're talking about a farmer who knows they need to do something different. Their crops aren't as abundant as they want them to be, or maybe they're not as healthy as they want them to be. They're used to putting inputs in instead of building the soil. And so that regen egg hurdle is almost reimagining how to do things differently and actually taking that next step to do something new.
Yeah, exactly. Like taking that step out of your comfort zone and just trying something. And it's not as much as turning your whole farm into it, but taking tiny steps if you feel uncomfortable about it. And it's not like it's some crazy and wild ideas. These are fact-based by science. So it's not something like it's a pie in the sky that you're going to go and shoot for, or you're shooting for the moon or something like that. It's fact-based. So there you can feel comfortable in that.
So what would you say to a farmer who is feeling that, like feeling really nervous and vulnerable about taking that next step and trying something new, like biologicals?
Yeah, if it's a new farmer, I would really highly suggest like the reason why he wants to take it. So if it's he's trying to improve his soil quality, we have to make it a little bit more simpler. Take a first step on what you want to try and achieve in your soil. So if you're trying to achieve a higher organic matter, for instance, in your soil, well, you have to look at some cover crops and start in specific cover crops that work in your area. Or if you're want to increase your micro activity, like a biological activity in your soil, well, take a look at different biological inputs and what they can do for you, and then see if that fits in your operation. And just start it on smaller steps so you can feel comfortable with it, and talk with like-minded people, like going to a coffee row and explaining what you're trying to do because you're excited about it. You might not get the same excitement from the people you're talking to, but if you're talking with like-minded people, you can gain some of their experience as well, and so you're not reinventing the wheel, and you can feed off each other.
Right. I love what you said there. So Coffee Row is like where everyone, all the locals go for coffee, right? Or all the local farmers too go for coffee, and they share their successes and wins and everything in between. What I love what you said was to start small, to really
Mhm.
connect with why you're doing it, like to start to connect with, like, are you going for disease control or crop increase, like increase your yields, or is it because you want to do something that's healthier for yourself or your family? Like just really connecting with that driving why. And then you also said the third one, which I love, is to speak with like-minded people, which is connecting with your tribe. And we often underestimate the power of that. So how do we find those people, Robert? How do we know who those people are?
Yeah, like it can be difficult in the organic sector. You have to be certified by a third party. And a lot of times them people are your tribe and they've tried different things and that's a good source. But also there's a lot of professionals out there that have the same understanding and if you go with them with what you're trying to achieve in your soil or what your problems are, they can help you in that regards. But you got to make sure that they're in the same area you are because there's a lot of agrologists that come out with and they're hired by chemical companies, and so they have different views on how to achieve your goals, and they might not fit with yours. So you got to find the professionals that have the same ideas and backgrounds that you're trying to achieve.
Hmm. I love that. That's super powerful. And what I also love, and I want to really amplify here, is aligning with your values as a farmer is one of the most powerful things you can do, not just for yourself, but also for your family and for the food that you grow. And when we're aligned with our values, the people who are part of our tribe kind of just magically show up. And I also want to just plant the seed and the idea that practicing farming and practicing building your soil health in a regenerative, mindful, holistic, natural, chemical free way is really a form of leadership in the world today. And so I just want to lift people up who are maybe considering making these steps to just really to step into a leadership role with that and a curiosity role with that, because what we're doing and what we're discovering about soil biology is so cutting edge and leading edge in the way that we see the world and the way that we see the way that we're growing food, because it's not just impacting the soil health, it's impacting the health of our food, which is impacting the health of humanity and all the creatures we share on this earth. So I just want to lift that up and tip my hat
Yeah,
to
for sure.
farmers. Yeah. So before we jump into biologicals and what they are and how to use them, how to find them, how to know whether you're using a good product or not, you're a grain farmer primarily, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. And you're also dryland farming. And so what is that exactly?
Dryland farming is farming without the use of irrigation, and it's like I farm in southern Saskatchewan where the rainfall is quite a bit less than some areas in Saskatchewan. So I consider that as also a component of dryland farming.
What do we have to keep in mind when we're dryland farming?
Well, when we're dryland farming, you have to realize that most often the limiting factor, yield factor, is moisture. And so like you have to change your farming practice or create your farming practice with that in mind. You have to keep that in mind, and it can be a struggle some days, especially if you're going through a drought
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, like this year, right? And
Yeah,
do you find using biologicals helps with the soil sponge?
absolutely. It's kind of more of a systems approach. So what I'm trying to do is try to increase my organic matter, and I know it's tough in dry years, like through cover crops, but also the soil microbes help and fungi especially help with nutrient and water gathering because the fungi can get into areas of the soil which trap moisture where your roots can't get to. So in a dry year, they have access to that tiny bit more moisture, which can maybe help you a little bit longer further down the growing cycle of your plant. So it does help with some of that stress factor. It's not a silver bullet, but it does help. Yes, definitely.
So you've actually seen a difference in your fields and in your crops.
I have even this last year we've had some fields that have not seen basically rain. And it's I was telling my son today, he says, yeah, the first rain that this crop has seen is going to be the rain that bleaches the wheat. It's kind of ironic, but the crop was there. It was well established, and it was filling 3 rows. We had good subsoil moisture, but nevertheless, it was a decent stand, and we have something to put through the combine, and I'm pretty fortunate for that.
That's amazing. A lot of farmers in our area, because I live in Southeast Saskatchewan too, and we're in a bit more of a banana belt than you. Like we get a bit more moisture, but there's a lot of people who aren't taking off a crop this year.
Yeah, I know it's a tough year, and it's pretty spotty along the Saskatchewan, the southern Saskatchewan border here, and it's especially in the west. But we have to use all the factors we can to try and increase that capacity of our soil to we gotta help it along too as well.
So, from what I understand, is you use biologicals and cover crops to help build that soil organic matter, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, tell us, Robert, what biologicals are and why we'd want to use them.
Well, where do I start? In the farming capacity that we use, it's not suitable for the soil. The fungi, it destroys the fungi, and it destroys because it's disrupting the natural cycles of the soil. So in doing so, and it's just commercial farming, it's no right or wrong, it's just the way it is. In doing farming the way we do it, commercial farming, it's reducing the amount of biology in the soil. So by using some biologicals, we're increasing the biological population in the soil, so we can have some of them functions that the biology can the benefits the biology can biologicals can offer the plants. So basically, a lot of the stress factors that a plant will face during the year, like drought stress, nutrient stress, insect disease stress, it'll help it in different ways. There's hundreds of thousands of different types of biologicals in the soil, and each one can provide a different function. And the plant is really smart at this. They'll detect what it needs, and they will feed the biological the microbes in your soil for to help them with the different stress factors. And if the microbes aren't there, then the plants are left to fend all these stress factors on their own. And a plant doesn't have an immune system, for instance. It relies on that soil biologicals to help fight off diseases and insects. So it's a real interesting the interaction between plants and the microbes in the soil.
Mm. For some people, this is a totally new term, Robert, a biological. Is that like a spray, or is it a dust, or is it pellets? Like, how do you, first of all, how do you just apply a biological?
Okay, so there's different methods. There's kind of like a peat-based method, and there's also a liquid. Now, depending on what you're trying to achieve, again, in your soil, there's some biologicals you can apply right to the seed,
Mhm.
which help the plant germinate because it detects all this biologicals and all the conditions are right for germination. So it encourages germination. There's also a foliar you can spray on to help the plant reduce stress in growing.
Mhm.
And there's also different type of biologicals with a residue digester where you spray it on your straw and it can decompose the straw in the absence of nitrogen, so it frees up that nitrogen for the following year. So like there's different applications that you can use in different whatever you want to achieve. There's different products like you can use that feed the existing biologicals in the soil, different microbes in the soil. So you really have to figure out like where you want to start.
That's amazing. So how do you figure out where you want to start?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I think it's tough I think it's really important to gain a little bit of knowledge on the biologicals and talk to somebody who has some experience with it. You can, yeah, reason out what you want to achieve. A lot of times, farmers, and for the best bang for your buck, it's just a seed treatment. And it seems like that's a really great place to start. And you can actually visually see that happening. You'll see the crop prop up a little bit quicker. And it's a robust plant. And you pull the roots out and you can see the on the soil on the roots because you'll see the rhizosphere, and as that dirt is sticking to the roots, that's the area where all that microorganisms are working, and and the root exudates are being pushed out. You can really see it working in that regard, and you can feel comfortable with that. A lot of times, we try a lot of these inputs, and there's so many limiting factors happening in the farming, and every year is different. And it's tough to see if it's actually working or not. And like this year too, with a lot of drought, well, that's your limiting factor. So it doesn't have the chance to see a lot of the benefits you're trying to do, like cover crops, they won't grow very well. And so the increase in organic matter might not be there as you like.
Would you also consider doing a soil test for the biology
Yeah,
in the soil?
absolutely. I think A&L Labs they do a extensive soil test on biologicals. There's two different types of tests. One to test there's the amount of microbes you have in your soil, and I think there's another test that will actually look at specific microbes in your soil.
Yeah,
So
there are definitely lots of tests to do that. I'm just curious if that would be a starting point. You can just measure the organic matter, like the bacterial to fungal ratio and the organic matter. And then you can also take a look at your biology and what's in the soil to maybe know your first steps. And then also that's something that a person could test throughout the season as well to see where it's at.
yeah, absolutely. That's a great, and not only that, it's a great, if you're going to use biologicals, it's a great benchmark where to start from. So then you have that benchmark to compare to in following years.
Mhm. So one burning question is composting is all the rage in whether you're a gardener or a market gardener or a greenhouse grower. More and more is being learned about compost, and there's a big push towards composting. And how many acres do you farm?
A few thousand acres.
3,000 acres. So making enough compost and compost tea for 3,000 acres would be a lot of compost. So I'm wondering, are biologicals something that somebody could use if they couldn't make their own compost, or if they wanted to try something different than composting? Would it replace it?
Yes, for sure. Well, composting does a little bit of different functionality, but for sure, it's a good alternative.
Mm,
Composting can be very complicated, and because not only for various reasons, you have to do it properly. You got to make sure that the weeds that you're composting is they're not viable anymore, and you want to make sure that you have your right recipe for composting, and the biology in your compost. You have to make sure that it's plant beneficial and not disease pathogens, and that requires a lot of knowledge base. And so yeah, it's like a full-time job just doing that, and a little bit of education would go a long ways there. On a larger scale, I mean, the next step would be just to buy some biologicals, and it's really easy, and you have a rep that'll come and tell you how to apply it and explain how it's going to benefit you. And yeah, so it's like anything you do to your soil is great, but you have to really be careful. The time management on a farm is sometimes crucial, is important as well. So
right. I deeply appreciate that. So we're not saying that biologicals necessarily replace composting. It's more like if a person doesn't have access to good, high quality compost, it could be something to use in place of, or alongside, or as a stepping stone.
yeah, for sure. Because compost, they also have a nutrient component to it where just microbes, they don't replace nutrients, but they solubilize nutrients in the soil. So, I mean, in the end result, you might get the same,
Mhm.
but the compost is more of a direct input on nutrients as well as microbes.
Mhm. What's the biggest hurdle in using biologicals?
The biggest hurdle, depending on what you want to use, it's a little bit more extensive because you're working with live bacteria, and you have to aerate some of these products for like 24 hours prior to application, and you have to keep the aeration process going, and you have to get your head wrapped around it. It's a process. It's beneficial. A lot of farmers understand microbes in regards with peas, like rhizobium bacteria with peas, so that
Mhm.
you can't keep that rhizobium bacteria in the sun, or you got to keep it out of the heat. but it's really not that it's really not that difficult to use microbes.
When is the best time to use
Oh,
biologicals?
well, there's different applications. So there's throughout the season, you can use biologicals anytime. With some of the residue digesters, for instance, you can apply it just before freeze up as long as you can get it in the ground and you get a rain to get into the soil. It will work in your soil as long as your soil is above zero. It will still work in your soil. When it freezes, it will go into dormant, and then when it thaws, it comes back out of dormancy and keeps working. So biologicals, it's not a one-time use. Once you add it to your soil, they'll stay there as long as the plants are there to provide a food source and for them. And so like keeping green plants on your soil, live roots really helps that biological component in your soil.
What do you love about biologicals?
I like it because they're there to help you. And so when you're adding them, that they're there to help the plant grow, which in turns help you get a crop, right? And there's free nitrogen fixers in the soil that will go and just turn nitrogen that's in the air into a plant usable form so the plants can use it. I mean, it's all there. Like it can solubilize all these minerals in the soil so your plants can use them. I like it just the fact that yeah, they're alive, they're there. You can apply them, they'll stay there as long as you can have the right practice to keep them alive. Another thing I like about biologicals, especially seed dressing, on the conventional side, you have all these fungicides you put on the seed. When you put biologicals on the seed, which kind of do this basically the same not it doesn't do the same thing as the fungicide, but it has the same results. And when you apply biologicals, you don't have to wear gloves, mask up. And if you drop a little bit on you, you don't have to go wash your hands right away. It's all natural and it's a lot safer to use. You don't have to send your kids to the house when you're treating your seed and and
Oh,
make
I love that.
you don't have to make sure your dog's not around eating the grain on the ground or but it's a lot safer product to use for sure.
Hmm. Robert, are there bad biologicals?
Oh, there can be. If your compost goes anaerobic, like without oxygen for a while, it creates some disease pathogens and can negatively impact your crop.
Yeah.
So also, if you have a sterile soil, the biologicals that come back quickly are the disease pathogens because they're really opportunistic. And for it to get the beneficial biologies to come back, it's a slower process. So that's why a lot of times you see a lot of diseases in your soil or in your crops, and it's because you're lacking the balance in your soil, the biological balance in your soil. And so you got to start by trying to introduce some beneficials and get that balance back.
Yeah. How long have you been using biologicals? How many years?
My third or fourth year maybe. Yeah.
That's really cool. So you've seen a lot. And what would you encourage people to look for when they're looking for a good biological?
Well, you want the best bang for your buck. So you got to look at how much things cost and what fits into your budget. And also you got to look for different like a diversity of biologicals. There's a lot of biologicals out there that are single species or two or three species. And if that's what you're trying to achieve, that's great. But there's also other biologicals that are the broad spectrum of biologicals, and so that gives you access to a lot more components in your soil
And what have you had the most success with personally?
with a broad spectrum, for sure. Yeah, you don't have to specifically target one area of your soil. You're just giving it a broad spectrum of biologicals. The soil is very complicated, and we don't know exactly what's happening in there. And so, by giving a broad spectrum of microbes and fungi, kind of hitting areas that maybe we're not sure that there's a lack in. So it just gives you a better coverage.
Hmm. Hmm. It's fascinating because we used to think that putting nutrients into the soil, like NPK, is what helps the plants grow, and it might give them a quick shot of juju to make them grow quickly. And what we're learning is that it's not actually nutrients being put into the soil, it's the availability of the nutrients that are in the soil. And it's having a diverse microbiology in the soil that actually gives the plants what they need to be strong and produce healthy food and produce big crops. Would you agree?
Yeah, oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, in modern farming, like on the conventional side, putting a nitrogen fertilizer down saturates the soil with nitrogen, which with the plant can uptake. So the plants are really, they can be lazy and they'll go for the easiest source of nutrients. So if you're by supplying nitrogen, they're going to go for the nitrogen source, and all the free nitrogen fixers in the soil, them little bacteria, there's no use for them. So the plant doesn't go after them and feed them through the root exudates. They don't encourage them to propagate. So they just kind of, the population disappears. And so now the plant in that soil is more dependent on external sources of nitrogen. I use that as an example, but it's a good for organic people too, to understand the importance of making the plants work for the nutrients. The plants really rely on the bacteria in the soil and the microbes in the soil for its growth. And that's one of its main purposes, to cultivate them bacteria. Well, one of the main purposes on that's important for the plants.
Yeah, I've learned so much doing Heart and Soil, and I learned a lot from my kids about this too. But I'm learning about the science of it in doing the work with Heart and Soil. I'm wondering if you've seen this happen in the work that you're doing with biologicals and inputs. All three of my kids around grade 4 had to do an experiment with bean seeds, and so they got to pick two different types of soil to grow these bean seeds in, and it happened every single year. The first year I almost had a heart attack because they chose the soil that was behind the house that we lived in, which was commercially farmed, heavily farmed with nitrogen and Roundup and all the things. It was a corn dairy farm. They took a cup of soil from there, and then they took a cup of soil from my parents' a certified organic farm, which also uses a lot of really good compost techniques and biodynamic practices. And every single year, the bean that was planted in the commercially farmed soil shot up, like it was like inches higher than the seed that had been planted in the organic soil. And the first year my heart was like what, that's not supposed to be happening. And what was interesting is within a couple of weeks, the soil, the bean plant that had been planted in the organic soil eventually reached the same height as the commercially planted seed. And not only did it reach the same height, but the stem was thicker, the leaves were greener, the plant was stronger. It was fascinating to see how the one that was planted in the commercial was like inches higher, and then in the long term, it reminds me of the tortoise and the hare. The other one came out so much stronger. And I'm wondering, do you see that in your practices as well?
Yeah, for sure. As a plant grows, especially if you're doing a seed dressing on your seeds, what happens is it'll encourage the plant to grow quickly, and it'll grow quickly out of the ground, like 3 or 4 inches. But then
Mm-hmm.
it kind of stops. Its main purpose is to cultivate that biology in the soil. So what it does is it's trying to create a root structure. It's trying to create basically its own little pharmacy in the soil, because it's encouraging all these different microbes to grow. It's all pushing them. It's capturing all the energy from the sun, and it's pushing it down in the soil to feed the microbes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of building its base basically to for the next stage of its plant growth. And once it feels like it has enough, then it starts growing again.
Fascinating. And what about when you're using biologicals? Is there anything you shouldn't do or you should really try to avoid to make sure that you're not messing anything up?
Um, Yeah, different farming practices are really hard on biologicals. Like keeping living roots in your soil really helps the biologicals. I grew up farming with my father and stuff, and the practice of summer fallow, keeping black summer fallow, is supposed to be a sign of a good farmer, a sign of you're doing things right and you're on top of your land and what's going on. But it's really tough, and I'm starting to understand like it's maybe wasn't the right practice for biologicals. But the idea is to keep your summer fallow black, keep your subsoil moisture there. But in reality, it's evaporation rate is huge on black soils, and you need to keep if your ground is shaded, it keeps the evaporation rate lower, and then any moisture you can use to create organic matter, which is a water holding capacity. And but a lot of these practices that we have back, like the old practices, they didn't take in consideration the biologicals in the soil. So some of them practices are really tough on 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 the soil bacteria.
So basically, you're saying when you put the biologicals in, you want to make sure that you don't destroy them by letting them die. So how would you support them with living roots? What would you do?
Well, like cover crops, you try to create a cover crop. You do have to summer follow, unfortunately, in the organic. You do have to control weeds, but if you can keep a live root in the soil for as long as you can, even let your weeds grow a little bit, but terminate the weeds before they create seeds.
Mhm.
There you get the benefit. Sometimes the weeds can act in part as a cover crop because it does have some benefits to let them grow a little bit. I know in the past, and some of the old farmers would kind of frown on that practice, but there's a lot of benefit in it as long as you can stay on top of it. And like I said, don't let the weeds go to seed.
Yeah, when I was grain farming, we would often let the weeds go up to put that organic matter back into the soil. And it was really stressful because there's a lot of farmers around who were just twitching to see all the weeds growing in the soil. But we actually learned that practice from an elder who had been farming organically for a really long time in the area, and he really believed that that was the best way. It wasn't about keeping the soil black. So,
Mm.
and at the same time, we're talking about that stepping into that leadership role as a farmer, right? Of being able to shoulder the conversations and the people talking about what you're doing differently and knowing that it's actually helping you get the results that you want. And it's good for your land, it's good for your family, it's good for the soil, it's good for our health. So I just wanted to presence that because I know how vulnerable that is. For me at the time, it wasn't such a big deal because I grew up organic farming and we always had weeds in our family. So I've been shouldering it for over 30 years. But my partner at the time, it was hard for him because the chatter and him just driving by the fields and the pressure that he felt to have them black was quite grandiose.
Yeah, and you have friends that farm and they'll tease you about it, and yeah,
Yeah.
they're just teasing, but I mean, still after a while, it gets to be tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can get to be tough, or you can focus on like what is going well and the crops that you're getting, the plants getting healthier, your land getting richer and higher in organic matter. And then you start to see the results that you're talking about, being able to shoulder drought and still have a crop.
And you got to keep in mind too, them weeds, it continues the nutrient cycling in your soil. Well, by summer following and keeping it, you're ending nutrient cycling. So and if in doing that, you have to replace the nutrients somehow. Otherwise, that'll be a limiting factor in your soil. So if you can maintain something growing on your soil, even if it's a weed, as long as you don't let it go to seed, I think it's helpful, it's beneficial, keeps that cycling going.
Very cool. And what about cover cropping? Because that's your other tool that you use in your farming practices. Why is cover cropping so important?
Well, cover cropping is important because it's first and foremost in Saskatchewan, one of the main things is organic matter in our soil, and we're depleting it. And so we have to increase our organic matter. And in doing that organic matter, It's your water holding capacity. So it's like your water bank. If you can increase that, then it'll as long it plays a big role in future crops. Also nutrients. It's a place to store nutrients because a lot of times if the nutrients get released, they can volatilize, they can evaporate off, or they can leach down, or they can get tied up in the soil with other components like the
Mhm.
salts in your soil. So if it's in a plant or in a organic matter state and is released at a timely fashion, your crops as you're cropping the following year would be able to utilize the nutrients.
And what are your favorite cover crops and why?
Well, in dryland farming, I have to say is we intercrop yellow blossom sweet clover with a cereal. I find that that has been our most productive. It's got huge tap roots, which reduces soil compaction. It grows well in southern Saskatchewan. It does have taproot. It can dry out your soil, but the benefits of that organic matter you're reintroducing and the nitrogen, it is a legume, so it creates a lot of nitrogen in your soil for the following year. I think the benefits really outweigh that negative component about drying out your soil. You got to start somewheres, and for me, that's my favorite cover crop. And it grows well tall. It shades the ground for most of this summer, and we usually plow it in around in July, first part of July.
So you're
And
intercropping it with a cereal?
yeah, with the cereal, so like a hard red spring or a
Right. And so so that first year it doesn't compete necessarily with the wheat. And but it
it
is leave it in and then you turn
yeah,
it in July.
if you get a lot of moisture, it can compete, but in a relatively like an average year or moderate moisture, it doesn't really compete. Like it'll be there, and you got to kind of watch it. But what happens if you have the right fungi component in your soil? They will actually, they're two roots. If they're closely seated close together, they will actually be joined by a fungi, which will share in the nutrient like nitrogen
Mhm.
that it produces. It'll actually export the nitrogen to the wheat crop.
Right. It's like they dance together. And Robert, would you, if your soil was vulnerable and you knew that moisture was an issue, could you just plant less of the clover with the wheat? Like, so it's like a light cover crop. Is that even beneficial?
Yeah, I never really thought about that. I always just planted at like a 4 pound rate, which is it's fairly light anyways to begin with. But yeah, I suppose a guy could. I never really toyed with that. I always just went with that 4 pound rate. Always seemed to work well for me, and it, very rarely that I see it competed with the wheat, and that's only on a very wet year, and if you have a shorter crop, you got to maybe consider a few factors. If you have a dwarf wheat, that the clover might actually compete with the wheat a little bit during harvest.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you would choose an intercrop clover rather than being something else in the spring or
Yeah, a lot of these companies that sell cover crop, they don't take in consideration, like in dryland farming, they don't take in consideration the the dryness of where we are. And so, like in southern Saskatchewan or even to the west, you have a lot of trying to use cover crops that just didn't grow well in my area, even with some adequate rain. I just, for some reason, it just had trouble establishing a decent cover crop. With that clover, it seems to always get established and always seems to, not always, but well, very high percentage of success with it.
that's really interesting. And then also it would cut down seeding costs too and fuel costs, right? If you're doing it
Hmm.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you broadcast it when you seed the wheat or do you
Um,
broadcast it?
I see it right with the wheat. It's in the road, same road. It's a seed placed with the wheat.
Okay, really
Yeah.
fascinating.
We
And
we have done broadcasting, but talking with certain agrologists with a regen ag background, they say, yeah, you would have the benefit of the cover crop, but you wouldn't have that nutrient sharing capacity because of the it'd be too far from the plant, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to row spacing, seed placing with the cereal, and also in seed placing with the cereal, it does compete. It suppresses the clover to some degree too as well. The clover also has a an allelopathy effect too, so it does suppress weeds the following year too as well. So it does have that ability as a weed suppression as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of organic farmers have noticed that when they have a field of clover or alfalfa and they leave it there for a number of years, then the weed pressure is way less coming out of that. So to me, it would make sense that it would also be less coming out of that, even if it was just a short succession. So that's interesting. I'm curious about the commercial farming and organic farming and why you do both.
Well, it works well in my practice because with the commercial farming, I can get in the field earlier. I can do it spreads out my workload, and so I can get in the field earlier. I have all these tools to help with weed pressure and everything else. And then once that's in there, then I can focus in on my organic farming, which is later seeding in general for weed control. And I always, because of my background, I have a lot of experience with organic farming, and I want to keep in touch. And it's kind of like my own little experiment. I want to increase my soil productivity and using biologicals. And I go more of a systems approach to try and increase it. Like we have a lot more tools now in the organic, like there's carbon-based fertilizers, cover crops, biologicals. Before, we just didn't have very much to work with. The cultivators basically we had to work with. And so it's a lot more interesting.
So, is part of your curiosity about having both to learn the impact of different practices in both so that you can help others?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Because I do sell certain products. I want to be able to relate to both sides, both farming as well. So it's tough to know some of the farmers' questions or difficulties if you're not doing the practice yourself. I find a lot of farming conventionally, a lot of the conventional farmers' questions I can relate to. I understand it very well. If I wasn't farming conventionally, it would be a little bit more tougher to relate to that. Likewise in organic farming too, same thing. It's just I know the hurdles, I know the pains they have to go through, and it's I can relate. I can relate to that. It's not. I'm not coming at it at someone who has all the answers and no practicality of it. So it helps me to help understand the farmer.
Mm-hmm. And do you find the biologicals help reduce the use of chemical inputs, both fertilizers and like pesticides and herbicides?
Yeah, well, for sure, it reduces definitely the fungal seed treatment. It replaces that. Also, the synthetic fertilizers you can decrease, and there's a lot of third-party trials being done on decreasing your nitrogen rate and the biologicals picking up the limiting factors of that. So up to even 10% nitrogen, you won't see a yield decrease. And there's always more and more trials, even at Egg in Motion. They're doing trials up there with, which is kind of cool because they're showcasing what the products can do, and they're not scared of putting it out there for people to see.
Amazing. And is that saving farmers money as well as helping them with their crop output?
Yeah, for sure. Because with biologicals, it does help with decreasing fertilizers, but it also helps with disease suppression too, as well, because you're having more balance in your soil. So, I mean, if you don't have to spend money on fungicides or maybe one or two passes less of fungicides, and I mean, you're putting out seed dressing anyways, you're treating your seed with something, might as well use a biological, which helps decrease your fertilizer usage and possibly helps with decrease in disease pathogens.
Hmm. And do you see using biologicals in commercial farming a bridge towards transitioning more into organic practices and away from, like, maybe even clearly it's more away from using chemicals, but do you see it people transitioning right out of the use of chemicals?
Yeah, as we get a better understanding of biologicals, how to use them, and using some of the natural cycles, like a decrease in the chemicals and fertilizers, very evident. And so if there's someone on the edge of like they want to make the leap from conventional to organic, it's not such a leap, it's just a step. It gives you a tool that you can use. It's not just, okay, I got to do this on my own now, and there's basically no help. Now there's help, and there's some understanding, and there's some professionals with that same understanding that'll help you along that transition. Well, back in the day, there was all the professionals coming out of university. They were geared towards how to read a soil test for NPK, and what chemical you need for which weed, and which fungicide you need for which disease, and that was the main focus. But now there's a greater understanding of the soil, and there's more people out there with the background of on that regen mindset.
Hmm. And who do you find more open towards using biologicals, organic or commercial farmers or someone else in between?
When I first started this, I thought this would be a great tool for organic farmers to get into, and it is. But organic farmers, they're opposed to using inputs. That old mindset, the soil's there, and input costs money. And organic farmers have had a tough go with the grain prices being the values being low, and so the profitability in the farm is lower than they would like, and so you have to make a living. And so any of that extra cash that they could use for soil improvement, it gets eaten up in just living and changing their equipment over and upgrading their equipment. But it's a real tough go for them. But I'm also finding the conventional farmers are really starting to take an interest, and there's really a big uptake on conventional growers as well, because there's with all the with Justin Trudeau saying there's going to be we're going to have to reduce the fertilizer use and everything else. It got farmers thinking we got to do something different, which is good and bad in a way. But well, it's good that farmers are considering we got to do something different, and there's different alternatives, and it opens up their mind instead of just doing the same practices over and over again.
Right. And what is the smallest amount of land or the smallest amount of seed that somebody could first try this out with and actually be able to see like a comparison?
The product I'm using and sharing with farmers, it's called EcoT, and it's a seed dressing. It comes in a pail, and you can treat, like, if it's depending on the weight of your grain. If it's a 60-pound bushel, it can treat up to 100 bushels. And so 100 bushels of like, if you're doing wheat, that's like it's not a very big plot of land, and you can see it side by side, and you can see the benefits there. A lot of people have done that, and you can see how it comes out of the ground quicker, more robust.
Wow. So you've done this yourself and you've had other farmers do it, and all of you noticing a difference.
Yeah, some people have got very technical, and they've actually timed it. They seeded it past, they marked the time, then they seeded it past with and without, and then they watch it every day, and it's noticeable. They say, yes, it is doing a difference. It does come out of the ground quicker.
What excites you the most about using biologicals?
It's a new concept. And for organic people, it's a tool. And for so many years, there's been no tools. And now it's a tool that farmers can use, and it can help them with their growing crops. Before, there was just very little we can use. And this is such a broad spectrum of microbes which help in so many different ways. And so it can really help in your soil health. Farming in general, it's really degrades the soil. Like, I mean, it's just part of farming. And so using biologicals, it'll slow the process down, and if not, create an equal balance. and in the best case scenario, it would increase the soil health. So, I mean, it doesn't matter what you do to your soil as long as we're doing something to help it along so it doesn't degrade. It's all good. And I find this is biologicals is one of the biggest benefits we can do.
Mm. And Robert, you've used a number of different types of biologicals, and what makes EcoT so special?
Well, EcoT is special in a sense that it's a broad spectrum. So there is 100,000 different species in there. And a lot of them species, we know that they're all beneficial to plant growth, but a lot of them, we just don't know the benefits, and it's a very complicated system. So we're we're just blasting the soil with all these beneficial biologicals. So it helps the plant grow in so many different ways because it's a complicated system. We don't know what the plant needs or what the soil's lacking. Like we can do tests and we can test for certain aspects of it, but it's like I said, it's complicated, and we know more about the universe above our heads and less about an inch beneath our feet. So it goes to show that the research in the soil is it hasn't been there. Well, they're working on it, but it's really unknown. So the bigger spectrum of biology you can use, I feel is the best benefit.
And what do you most want people to know and understand about EcoT?
It's a broad spectrum. It helps with plant growth. A lot of the stress factors in the plant's growth stage, it will help anywhere from scavenging nutrients, water, and it helps it come out of the ground. It gives it more robust, better root structure, cold vigor. They're talking in the early seeding crops. It helps with cold vigor because some of the biology it helps with that cold vigor. And I'm not quite sure the technical terms about that, but also spring frost. It helps it withstand for spring frost. It's amazing because there's so much biology. It helps in so many different ways. So it's tough to explain all these different factors, and they're doing tests all the time, third-party trials on a lot of these factors, and they're just finding new ways in how it's helping the crops.
So if a person wanted to try some EcoT, what's the best way to do that?
Well, contact a dealer in the area and just ask. There again, you have to understand what you're trying to achieve because there's different products. I was just focusing on the seed dressing here, and then talk to one of the reps, and then you can dial into what you want to try. Different types of the year. So if you want to try EcoT, there's different ways to apply it. So if you want to do it, there's an in-furrow. You can apply it if you have a liquid kit on your air seeder. You can apply it right into the soil, so you're inoculating your soil. That's if you want to increase the biological component to your soil. You can do seed dressing, which just helps the seed germinate and grow and create that rhizosphere, a healthy rhizosphere around the root. And there's also a foliar. You can spray it when the plant is in the 3 to 4 inch up to the flag leaf to help with the stress factors of the plant if it's facing some different stress factors while it's growing. And then there's also a residue digester at the end, and that's this is kind of an interesting one. They're also doing research. It breaks down the straw with the use of fungi instead of the soil bacteria. Soil bacteria, when it breaks down the crop residue, it uses nitrogen to break it down. But with EcoT, it has the fungi component, which uses the fungi to break the residue digestion down, which doesn't tie up that nitrogen. So if you're going to crop the next year, that nitrogen is available to your crop. And that's significant. They've been doing soil tests on it, and it's been proving that as well. Also increasing the phosphate too in your soil. I've been using biologicals for a number of years. On the organic side, I use it for a quick germination so it can compete well with the weeds, and also just a robust and healthy plant, better nutrient density, a little higher protein. in some instances. Yeah, so it's very exciting for me to use.
Awesome. And what about conventional or commercial?
I've been using biologicals also on the conventional side as well. It replaces a lot of fungal seed treatments, and then you get the benefit also as the biological as the plant growth, different growth stages of the plant's life cycle. Also decreasing your fertilizer if you're interested in that. There's also that component as well. And
Awesome.
residue digesters. There's if you're getting a buildup of residue on your soil, we have residue digesters which can help decompose that absence of nitrogen. So you have extra nitrogen for the following year, lowering your nitrogen usage for that following year.
Where do people find biologicals?
Well, I've been using biologicals for 4 years and they've worked really well for me. And so I wanted to offer it to different farmers. So if you're in southern Saskatchewan or even central Saskatchewan, you can call me and we can discuss and what you're looking at. Also, EcoT has a website. You can go on to it and it'll give you a little bit more extensive of what EcoT is all about. And yeah, give me a call if you have any questions.
Awesome. And then if somebody was like in a different part of the world, like say the States or Eastern and Western Canada or Europe or something like that, how would they find a biological to use?
Yeah, well, the internet is a great place to start. You can go on the internet and you can see if there's any local biologicals or if there's any biologicals that would fit the application you're trying to achieve in your soil or in your plants, be it horticulture or commercial grain farming.
Awesome. Because biologicals can be used in grain farming, horticulture, on golf courses, on your lawns, on your in your gardens, in your backyard. It's not just a one-use seed coating opportunity for grain farmers. It can be used globally in lots of different ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like EcoT has been around actually for a number of years, like over 15 years, and they had their start in horticulture and in golf courses as well. It reduced the snow mold, and it's not because of they were trying to reduce fertilizer and pesticide use. It's just because it worked. Better root structure. They didn't have to water as much, and as a crowd went past, like watching a golf tournament, if the crowd was walking the grass would come back quicker. So
Wow,
it's interesting.
that's super interesting. Well, I've really enjoyed learning more about biologicals from you, Robert. And what I love about you is that you are farming. I mean, sometimes it kind of like is a quirk that when people are commercial farming and organic farming. And I think that one of the things that's unique and deeply valuable about you and your story is that you have the experience of both organic farming and commercial farming. And it kind of makes it safe for people in both camps to have conversations with you and to learn from you and what you're noticing in both your commercial crops and your conventional crops, and more than the crops, what's happening in the soil. And you also are just really easy to relate to, and you're open about what's working, what's not working, and I appreciate that about you. So thank you so much for joining us for this interview today and sharing just a small part of your story in your farming journey.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. It's very kind of you to say that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's my honor. Be sure to go and check out Top Horizon's website at tophorizonинputs.com. And if you have questions, give Robert a call. He's happy to have a conversation with you. If you listen to Heart and Soil podcasts or watch our interviews, you know I am a big fan. We are a big fan of composting. And at the same time, what Robert is saying is true. It can be hard for some people to learn how to make good compost, and it can be hard to gather all the materials to make good compost. So if you're looking for a bridge in upleveling your organic farming or your garden or your commercial farm, biologicals might be the next best step for you. So I invite you to give Robert a call and find out if it's a good fit for you and your operation. Or if you have questions, maybe do a little bit of research in your area of other people who are using biologicals, what they're using, why they're using it, and the difference it's making, and how you might be able to incorporate some biologicals into your farming and gardening practices. You make yourself an amazing day. Big love, and thank you so much for joining us. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet and you're finding these conversations valuable, then please hit the subscribe button, ding that bell, and share it with your friends. It really helps spread the word about global regeneration, soil regeneration, and the impact soil health has on our personal health and our planetary health. Big love. Make yourself an amazing day.